I should be dead right now, because of a truck, a hill, and an HOA Karen with wire cutters. It started like any normal Thursday. I was running late for work and barely had time to sip my lukewarm coffee before grabbing my keys and jogging out to my old Ford F-150. It wasn't the prettiest thing in the world, sure, but it was reliable. Built like a brick wall and rumbled like an old-school V8 should. The neighbors hated it. Well, one neighbor in particular. Karen. The self-proclaimed queen of our HOA. She once called it an urban menace on wheels, and threatened to report it for noise violations, at 3 p.m. on a Saturday. I used to laugh it off. That morning, I should have taken her more seriously. I tossed my lunch in the passenger seat, fired up the ignition, and rolled down the sloped driveway like I had 1,000 times before. But this time, something was wrong. Very wrong. The moment I tapped the brake to slow before hitting the road, I felt nothing. No resistance. No grind. Just my foot slamming into the floorboard. I slammed it again, harder. Still nothing. My truck was picking up speed now, barreling down the hill like a runaway freight train, and the only thing ahead of me was a four-way intersection with a cement truck already in the middle of it. My heart climbed into my throat. I yanked the emergency brake and cranked the wheel, hoping for a miracle. The truck veered sharply, tires screaming as it jumped the curb and plowed through a decorative fence someone spent way too much money on. It finally stopped inches from a mailbox. A ceramic flamingo exploded under the front tire. Somewhere, a neighbor screamed. I sat there breathing like I'd just run a marathon, hands clenched on the wheel, staring at the smoke curling from under the hood. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered. HOA members in bathrobes and slippers were peeking through their blinds like it was an episode of Desperate Housewives. Karen stood in her doorway, hands on her hips, wearing a pastel blue track suit that looked like it came straight from a QVC crime documentary. She was smirking. Not shocked. Not concerned. Just satisfied. I noticed her look down at something on the lawn. I followed her gaze. It was a pair of shears. Gardening shears. Just lying there, slightly hidden behind her neatly trimmed hedges. I might have written it off as coincidence if she hadn't kicked them backward with her foot. Real smooth, Karen. Still shaken, I called my mechanic, Todd, and had the truck towed over. Todd's been working on my vehicles since I was 17. He's a bearded wizard when it comes to engines, and he rarely ever gets rattled. But when he called me that afternoon, his voice cracked. "Hey man. You got a minute? You're gonna want to sit down." I was already sitting. "That bad?" Todd exhaled. "Your brake lines didn't just go bad. Someone cut them. Clean. Like with a tool. Nowhere. No corrosion. This wasn't nature. This was sabotage." That word hit like a punch. Sabotage. I blinked at my phone like it had just insulted my family. "Are you serious?" "I'm sending you pictures now," Todd said. This was intentional. I opened the photos and there it was. A surgical-looking slice right through the rear brake line. No rust, no dragging. Just snipped like a ribbon at a mall opening. I stared at the image while my brain tried to catch up. The weight of what could have happened started to settle in. If I hadn't reacted fast, if the timing had been slightly different, if that cement truck had pulled out half a second earlier, I would have been toast. Or worse, someone else could have been hurt. All because someone wanted to make a point? There was only one person in the entire neighborhood who'd ever threatened to make that truck go away. Karen. She hated the truck more than HOA fee reminders. She'd complained to the board, filed noise complaints, and even suggested it lowered the property value with its aggressive stance. Her latest letter, slid under my door 2 days ago, actually said, "If you won't do something about that monster, then someone else will." At the time I laughed. Now I was wondering whether that someone had a pair of garden shears and a serious lack of sanity. I called the police, but you can probably guess how that went. The officer who showed up was polite but skeptical. No cameras. No witnesses. No direct evidence. "Could be a neighborhood kid," he said. "Or maybe someone trying to steal parts." Classic trick. But when I mentioned Karen, he paused. Wait. Karen Lewis. I nodded. He sighed. She's got a file. That made my eyebrows shoot up. Turns out, Karen's been the subject of several complaints over the past 3 years. Petty stuff, keying cars, poisoning lawns, even allegedly supergluing someone's mailbox shut. But nothing stuck. She was slippery, and the HOA always protected its own. It was a small suburban town with big gossip and even bigger cover-up. I needed something more. Something she couldn't wriggle out of. That's when I remembered my brother Jake. Jake isn't just a car guy. He's a defense engineer who builds tanks, literal tanks, for the army. He once modified a Jeep to withstand landmines just to prove a bet. He lives 2 hours away, but when I told him someone tried to kill me by cutting my brakes, he was at my door by sundown with a GoPro, a duffel bag full of gear, and a smile that said, "Let's make her famous." Jake walked around the wrecked truck, inspecting the damage. "You know what's funny?" he said. "This kind of cut isn't even subtle. Whoever did this was either confident you wouldn't find it, or wanted you to crash. This wasn't just mischief. This was attempted harm. We're going to set a trap." I looked at him, skeptical. "You mean like cameras?" Jake's eyes gleamed. "Way better than cameras. We're going to build her a target. One she can't resist." That's when he opened the duffel and pulled out a device that looked like it came straight out of a Marvel movie. "Meet the decoy rig," he said. "By the time we're done, we'll have enough evidence to not only nail Karen but make her go viral doing it." I didn't know what he meant yet, but I was all in, because Karen had just declared war. And she had no idea my brother builds tanks for fun. Jake always had that look in his eye when he was about to start building something absurd. The kind of look that meant wires would be everywhere, and someone was going to end up very confused, or arrested. He unpacked the rest of the duffel bag across my garage floor like he was laying out a battlefield. There were wires, fake hydraulic lines, small motion sensors, a portable speaker, even a canister of bright red smoke dye. I stared at the collection like it was a magic show. Jake smiled and said, "We're going to give Karen the trap she deserves." The plan was simple in concept, but ridiculous in execution. Jake was going to modify an old, scrap body truck I had behind the shed, one that hadn't run in years and was basically just a shell. It didn't need to drive, it just needed to look like it did. We'd make it seem like I bought a new truck, cleaner and shinier than the old one, and park it right in Karen's line of sight. It would be bait. Underneath, Jake would install dummy brake lines that led to a pressurized canister filled with red dye smoke. He'd rig the lines with micromotion sensors, so if anyone cut them, the canister would detonate a dramatic cloud of red that would blast out the wheel well and cover the perpetrator in evidence. Simultaneously, a speaker under the hood would blare an alert recorded in Jake's military drill sergeant voice saying, "Step away from the vehicle. You are being recorded." And we would record it too. 4 motion-activated cameras hidden in solar garden lights would capture the whole thing in full HD from every angle. Jake even had a drone ready to launch if motion was detected around the truck at night. The entire setup was so high-tech it could have caught a raccoon writing its memoirs. But this wasn't about raccoons. It was about a woman who thought HOA authority made her untouchable. Jake called it Operation Tankbait. I called it Poetic Justice. We spent the entire weekend working on the setup. While I scrubbed the shell truck clean and repainted it in matte black with faux chrome trims, Jake was under the hood doing unspeakable things with soldering tools. We added just enough visual detail to make it look intimidating but not suspicious. A fake security system light blinked on the dash. Even the plates were custom ordered to say K4 Renter. When it was done, it looked like the kind of vehicle that made HOA Karens everywhere file anonymous complaints in their sleep. We parked it in my driveway Monday morning, right where Karen could see it from her kitchen window. It gleamed in the sun. The red trim practically glowed. I washed it with exaggerated enthusiasm, whistling loudly and singing lines like, "Hope nobody cuts my brakes again," while waving at Karen's house. I even tossed in phrases like brand new lines. "Would be a real shame if someone snipped them." She didn't respond at first, but we noticed her blinds twitching. She was watching. Jake stayed hidden inside my garage most of the day, monitoring the feeds. We both knew Karen wouldn't strike during the day. She was many things. Loud, entitled, unpredictable, but she wasn't stupid enough to sabotage something in broad daylight with cameras everywhere. No, Karen did her dirty work under the cover of darkness, when the rest of the cul-de-sac was asleep and she could pretend she was just gardening at night, like she once told a neighbor after digging up their flower bed during a full moon. That night, we activated the cameras, armed the red smoke, and settled in for a stakeout. Jake had the monitor rigged in the garage with live feeds from every angle, and I brought snacks like we were watching a Netflix drama. Every time a leaf moved, Jake clicked the zoom. It was hours of nothing, then a cat, then more nothing. Around 2:30 a.m., Karen's porch light flicked on. Jake leaned forward. "Showtime," he whispered. Karen crept out of her side door wearing a hoodie, black yoga pants, and glove. She had a small flashlight in one hand and what looked like hedge clippers in the other. She paused on her front steps and scanned the street. Her movements were slow, careful, not the usual loud stomping she was known for during her HOA walks of doom. She crossed the yard, crouched low, and moved along the fence line like she was in some kind of suburban spy movie. She didn't notice the blinking light in the birdhouse or the tiny lens hidden in the gnome statue 10 feet away. She reached the truck, glanced under it, and then knelt with the clippers. As soon as she made contact with the fake brake line, the trap triggered. The red smoke exploded out of the wheel well with a loud hiss and a cloud of color that made it look like the truck was bleeding Kool-Aid. Karen screamed, high-pitched and immediate. The speaker under the hood roared to life with Jake's pre-recorded drill sergeant voice yelling, "Step away from the vehicle. This sabotage attempt has been recorded." She flailed backward, slipping on the dewy grass and landing right in the kiddie pool Jake had filled with molasses and glitter. It was his idea to slow her down in case she ran. She tried to scramble to her feet, but her shoes stuck in the sticky mess, and she fell again, this time face first. The cameras got everything. Her shocked expression, her clippers midair, her glitter-covered meltdown, and the red dye smeared across her hoodie. It was glorious. Neighbors started flicking on lights. Some came out in robes, filming on their phones. Karen tried to yell that she was checking for an oil leak, and that we were endangering the neighborhood, but it didn't help that she looked like a rejected cartoon villain covered in glitter and molasses. One guy from 2 houses down said, "Hey, that's the lady who keyed my Prius last year." When the cops arrived, again, they didn't need convincing. Between the camera footage, the clippers in her hand, and her earlier threats toward the truck, it was an open and shut case. Karen tried to say it was all a prank, that she was the victim, that someone else had set her up, but the footage told a different story. Her face when she realized she was live-streamed to the private neighborhood Facebook group was priceless. As she was placed in the back of the cruiser, Karen shrieked something about calling a lawyer and how she knew people in zoning. Jake and I watched from the porch, sipping coffee like we were at a sunrise viewing. He nudged me and said, "You know, maybe I should make this a business. Anti-Karen surveillance vehicles." I laughed. "You'd have more clients than Starbucks." But we weren't done yet. This was just the beginning. Karen was going to trial, and we had enough footage to fill a documentary. If she thought cutting brake lines was going to scare me, she had no idea what family she messed with. Jake builds tanks. And now? He builds traps. The morning after Karen's glitter and molasses meltdown felt like waking up in an alternate universe where justice actually worked overnight. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By the time I stepped out to grab the newspaper, 3 different neighbors waved at me with giant grins, and one even gave me a thumbs up. Mrs. Culver from across the street whispered, "We always knew she'd go too far," like this was a long-awaited finale to a drama series we'd all been watching from our windows for years. My phone was blowing up with messages from the private HOA Facebook group, where someone had uploaded a compilation of Karen's greatest hits from the surveillance footage. It had background music, slow-motion effects, and even a freeze-frame moment of her falling into the molasses pool. The caption read, "Karen vs. Karma, the final showdown." I hadn't laughed that hard in months, but this wasn't just neighborhood gossip anymore. Karen's stunt had crossed into criminal territory. The brake line sabotage was attempted vehicular assault, and now that the footage clearly showed her doing it, the police were building a real case. Still, the charges weren't finalized yet, and Karen, of course, wasn't going down quietly. She posted a 1,000-word rant on her personal Facebook page about how the neighborhood was full of bullies, how I was militarizing my driveway, and how she was the true victim of psychological warfare conducted by domestic vigilantes. She ended it with a sentence so unhinged it belonged in a conspiracy podcast. "They glitter-bombed me to silence the truth." That one got screenshotted and sent around so much, someone had it printed on a coffee mug by noon. Karen posted bail, and within 48 hours, she was back in her house. We figured she'd stay low and lawyer up, maybe prepare for court. But not Karen. She immediately started pacing her yard like a general inspecting enemy territory, sunglasses on, arms folded, whispering to someone on speakerphone. Every once in a while she'd glare directly at my house like she was daring us to try something else. Jake, ever the strategist, just chuckled and said, "She's not done. She's planning her next move." Good. So are we. Sure enough, a few days later, a letter arrived from Karen's attorney. It was written in that overly polite, overly threatening tone lawyers use when they're about to waste everyone's time. Karen was suing me for intentional emotional distress, unjust surveillance, and the absolute kicker, psychological entrapment through glitter-based provocation. Even the notary stamp looked embarrassed to be on the page. I handed it to Jake, who read the whole thing while chewing a granola bar, then calmly set it down and said, "Perfect. Let's countersue." And that's how it began. The most ridiculous legal feud in HOA history. I called up a local attorney who specialized in civil disputes and showed her the footage, the letter, and the past HOA violations Karen had stacked up like she was playing HOA bingo. My lawyer's eyes lit up the moment she saw the molasses fall. "Oh, we're going to bury her in paperwork." The HOA board, now under immense pressure from residents who were sick of Karen's antics, decided to step in too. They scheduled an emergency hearing to vote on whether Karen should be suspended from the board indefinitely pending legal action. Jake and I attended the meeting in person, both wearing matching t-shirts that said, HOA Freedom Squad, just to twist the knife a little. Karen showed up with 2 giant folders and a PowerPoint presentation she claimed would prove I was running a coordinated neighborhood psyop. The moment she brought up the fake birdhouse cameras, everyone stared at her like she was auditioning for a role in a soap opera. One board member asked gently, "Karen, are you accusing a resident of using bird-themed espionage?" She nodded proudly. Yes. It was weaponized landscaping. The vote was unanimous. Karen was suspended pending investigation. She stormed out mid-meeting, muttering something about calling the mayor and filing a civil rights complaint against my sprinkler system. Jake, ever the troll, stood up and asked, "So can we replace her seat with a cardboard cutout of a raccoon?" The room actually clapped. But while the neighborhood was laughing, the courtroom was looming. The district attorney had decided to pursue misdemeanor criminal mischief and reckless endangerment charges based on the brake line sabotage, citing the clear video evidence and the deliberate nature of the act. Karen's lawyer tried to file a motion to dismiss, claiming it was all a social experiment, but it was rejected almost instantly. The trial date was set, and it wasn't long before subpoenas started flying. Jake took things to a whole new level by creating an animated digital recreation of the sabotage scene. He used his defense engineering software to render a 3D animation of Karen sneaking up, cutting the brake line and triggering the smoke trap, complete with comical sound effects and a dramatic slow-motion replay of the molasses fall. We didn't even need to use it as evidence, it was just for morale. Still, we brought it to court just in case. Karen arrived in court dressed like she was heading to a funeral for decency, black veil, dark lipstick, the works. She tried to make a statement about being violated by neighborhood surveillance, but the judge cut her off before she could finish the sentence. My lawyer presented the footage, the brake report from my mechanic, the threatening HOA letter she'd written, and the police file that showed she'd been suspected in multiple other acts of neighborhood vandalism. Karen's lawyer looked like he regretted going to law school. The judge didn't even need a recess. After watching 15 seconds of the video, just enough to see Karen cutting the brake line and getting blasted with red smoke, he leaned forward and said, "I think we've seen enough." Karen was found guilty of reckless endangerment and criminal mischief. Her sentencing included community service, a $5,000 fine, and mandatory anger management classes. The civil lawsuit she filed against me? Dismissed with prejudice. The countersuit? Moving forward. As she was led out of court, Karen snarled at Jake, "This isn't over." Jake smiled calmly and replied, "You're right. There's still the HOA vote to revoke your membership entirely." The judge actually laughed. By the end of that week, Karen was officially banned from holding any HOA position ever again, and the board issued a formal apology to the neighborhood for previously overlooking patterns of behavior inconsistent with our values. In simpler words, they finally admitted Karen was a problem. Jake and I celebrated with barbecue and a few neighbors who'd quietly supported us through the ordeal. One of them brought over a cake that read, "Don't cut corners, Karen," in bright red frosting. As we sliced it, Jake raised his drink and said, "You know, all of this because she couldn't stand your truck." I nodded. Guess she picked the wrong driveway. But we both knew Karen wasn't entirely done. People like her never just go away. They retreat, regroup, and then pop back up when they think no one's looking. So we kept the cameras up. Not out of fear, but out of habit. Karen may have underestimated a truck owner, but she'd never make that mistake again with a tank builder watching from the porch. It was strange seeing the neighborhood so calm without Karen lurking around every corner like a sentient HOA rulebook. For the first time in years, people walked their dogs without worrying about getting fined for the leash length. Kids played basketball without Karen snapping pictures of the noise level meter on her phone. Even the mailman looked visibly more relaxed. It was like someone had removed a pressure valve no one realized was even there. But while the street had found some peace, the courtroom chaos was just getting started. Karen's criminal sentencing may have been wrapped up, but the civil suit was about to turn into something bigger than anyone expected. My attorney filed an official claim for damages, citing reckless endangerment, psychological trauma, and vehicle tampering that could have resulted in my death or serious injury. We included a detailed breakdown of the mechanic's findings, towing bills, emergency service reports, and even therapy receipts, not for dramatic effect, but because Jake insisted. He said, "If Karen wants theatrics, let's give her a Broadway production. Opening night, closing night, and reruns." Jake, of course, volunteered to testify. And he didn't just show up with words. He showed up with blueprints. The day of the civil trial felt less like a legal hearing and more like a tech presentation. Jake rolled in a portable monitor, hooked up a laptop, and unveiled an entire visual sequence titled, "The Anatomy of Sabotage." The judge raised an eyebrow. Karen's lawyer objected before the slideshow even started, but the judge allowed it. Jake began walking through his demonstration, calmly and professionally, like he was pitching military equipment to the Pentagon. He showed the modified truck with the trap rig, explaining the pressure system, motion sensors, and decoy lines. Then he played the surveillance footage, synced frame by frame with the blueprint overlays, complete with zoom-ins and timestamp. It was devastatingly thorough. Karen sat completely still, arms folded, trying to look composed. But every time her face popped up on screen, clippers in hand, eyes darting around, crouched like a cartoon burglar. Her own lawyer cringed. When Jake finished, there was a long silence. Then the judge leaned back and said, "Well, that was the most impressive exhibit I've seen in civil court. Ever." Karen tried to protest, muttering about how she was set up, how she was provoked, how no one respects the spiritual boundaries of neighborhood tranquility. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder, clearly begging her with his eyes to stop talking. But Karen couldn't. She launched into a wild theory that Jake was part of a secret military task force that conducted psychological warfare through truck design. She actually said the words, "auditory domination through engine revving," and at least 2 jurors coughed to hide their laughter. The opposing legal team barely had a case. They argued that Karen acted out of frustration, that she had no prior criminal record, and that my truck had caused her emotional fatigue. My lawyer fired back with HOA records, neighbor testimonies, and footage of Karen previously threatening to remove that menace by any means necessary. There was no getting around it. The jury saw what happened, they heard the threats, and they understood the danger. It wasn't just about a truck. It was about someone who thought they could play God with other people's lives over property aesthetic. The jury awarded us the full damages we requested, plus punitive damages for malicious intent. It was a massive financial blow to Karen. She screamed in the courtroom as the verdict was read, yelling that the system was rigged, that everyone was against her, and that she would appeal all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. Jake leaned over to me and whispered, "I give it 3 weeks before she's trying to sell Karen was right t-shirts on Etsy." The judgment meant Karen had to sell her second car and take out a home equity loan just to avoid losing her house. And with the HOA banning her from the board and the majority of the neighborhood treating her like she carried the plague, she knew it was only a matter of time before she had to leave. Still, in true Karen fashion, she went out swinging. One night, she marched down the street taping flyers to mailboxes that read, "Warning. Neighborhood under military occupation," with a blurry picture of Jake adjusting a drone. Jake actually laughed when he saw it and said, "She should have at least used the good side of my face." I would have ignored the flyers, but Jake had another idea. The next day, we hosted a block party, under the guise of celebrating the end of HOA budget season. But everyone knew what it really was. We set up a bounce house for the kids, a grill station with burgers and hot dogs, and a projector in the yard showing Karen's trial highlight reel on loop with popcorn served nearby. Someone even made cupcakes with miniature clippers on top. The sign at the entrance to the event read, "Neighborhood Peace Celebration, no glitter required." We had over 50 people show up. Karen stood on her porch for about 10 minutes watching, then disappeared back inside, and didn't come out for the rest of the weekend. 2 days later, a moving truck showed up in front of her house. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't even wave. She just loaded her boxes, slammed the door, and left. No note. No goodbye. Just silence. And just like that, the woman who thought she could dominate an entire street with rules, fines, and veiled threats was gone. I'd like to say it felt like victory, but it felt more like a long overdue exhale. Everyone could breathe again. Jake stayed a few more days. We cleaned up the garage, retired the decoy truck, and talked about life without Karen. He said he was proud, not just because the trap worked, but because I stood up for myself. "People like her win when others stay quiet," he said. "You didn't just stop her. You showed everyone else they could too." Before he left, Jake gave me a gift. It was a license plate frame that read, "Protected by Tank Tech." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped it. We hung it over the workbench in the garage. A reminder of what happened. A reminder of who tried to silence me. And more importantly, a reminder of who failed. The neighborhood eventually voted in a new HOA president, someone normal, approachable, and very anti-Karen. They even started revising the bylaws to prevent another board member from getting that much unchecked power again. And I kept my truck, rebuilt it, repainted it, made it louder just for the symbolism. Every time I drove past Karen's old house, I gave a little tap on the horn. Not out of spite. Just celebration. Because no matter how many rules she wrote, threats she made, or brake lines she cut, Karen learned the hard way what happens when you push the wrong guy. Especially when his brother builds tank. In the weeks that followed Karen's dramatic departure, the neighborhood felt transformed, almost as if it had been released from some kind of invisible chokehold. For years, people had tiptoed around their own homes, fearful of citations, fines, or unhinged verbal attacks from the woman who seemed to treat every blade of grass like a personal battleground. But now that fear was gone. There was laughter in driveways, impromptu barbecues on front lawns, and neighbors who hadn't spoken in years were suddenly sharing tools and recipes like old friends. It was surreal, but it was exactly what a neighborhood was supposed to feel like. And while everyone else celebrated a return to peace, Jake and I quietly enjoyed something deeper: closure. The HOA board didn't waste any time revising its policies. A new clause was added to prevent any one board member from having too much power, and they even passed a resolution forbidding unauthorized interference with private property, vehicles, or lifestyle preferences, which was clearly a polite way of saying, "Don't be like Karen." The new president, a retired firefighter named Carlos, knocked on my door one afternoon with a welcome basket that included cookies, a thank you note, and a printed apology from the board for not acting sooner. I told him I didn't need the apology, but I appreciated the gesture. What I really wanted was for no one else to go through what I had. Carlos nodded and said, "That's why we're cleaning house." Of course, even as we moved on, Karen wasn't completely done haunting us. 2 weeks after she left, someone noticed that she had posted a review of our neighborhood online. It was a deranged rant about military-grade harassment, engine terrorism, and a bizarre section where she claimed we installed drones disguised as birds to spy on her. The post was so unhinged it went viral on Reddit, and within hours, someone cross-posted it to EntitledPeople with the caption, "This lady got owned by her neighbor and his tank engineer brother." The internet, as expected, did its thing. Memes exploded. Someone edited the footage of her being covered in red smoke to look like a video game cutscene. Jake loved every second of it. He even changed his gamer tag to Glitterstrike95 as a tribute. But despite the laughs and the memes, I couldn't help but reflect on how close this all came to being a tragedy. If I hadn't had Jake, if I hadn't trusted my gut, if the brakes had failed just a few seconds later, there's a chance I wouldn't be here to tell the story. It made me appreciate the people around me even more. My neighbors who stood by me, my mechanic who didn't overlook the sabotage, and my brother who could have easily shrugged it off but instead built the most Karen-proof trap in suburbia. Jake eventually headed back to his base, but not before leaving one final surprise behind. A week after he left, I got a delivery, an enormous custom mailbox shaped like a tank, complete with rotating turret and a sign that read, "Mail secured, brake lines not included." I nearly cried laughing. I installed it immediately. The HOA approved it unanimously. One neighbor even suggested it become the new community symbol. And somehow, that silly mailbox became a landmark. People driving through the neighborhood would stop to take photos. The story had spread so far that even local news wanted to do a segment. I declined the interview, but Jake accepted. When they asked him what his advice was for people dealing with their own neighborhood Karens, he said, "You don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with red dye, molasses, and high-definition cameras." The countersuit payout came through a month later. The judge awarded not only the damages but also legal fees and a statement of recognition that Karen had acted with malicious intent. I donated a chunk of it to a local veterans group, something Jake had been involved in for years, and used the rest to finally finish my backyard project, a custom-built outdoor kitchen where the old fence Karen hated used to stand. I invited the entire block for a cookout. No surprise, everyone showed up. People brought chairs, kids ran around barefoot, and someone even brought a karaoke machine that got way too much use after dark. I grilled ribs, passed out beers, and at one point raised a toast that summed it all up perfectly. To community, to good neighbors, and to brake lines that stay exactly where they're supposed to. That night, as the sun went down and the backyard glowed with string lights and the smell of barbecue lingered in the air, I realized something important. Karen thought she could control the narrative. She thought she could silence people through fear, intimidation, and abuse of power. But in the end, all she did was bring the neighborhood closer together. Her downfall reminded everyone that entitlement doesn't win in the long run. Truth does. And sometimes a little creativity. A few weeks later, I received a strange envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper that read, "You think this is over. It's not. People like me don't go away." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. Jake saw it and shrugged. Let her threaten. She can't touch you anymore. And he was right. Karen had become a warning, not a weapon. Her threats were echoes now, noisy, but powerless. We kept the cameras up, of course. Not because we expected another sabotage attempt, but because the neighborhood had decided to install a community-wide security system. Jake helped design it. Subtle, effective, and completely Karen-proof. The HOA newsletter even started including security tips titled Tank Tactics, written anonymously by Jake. Each one ended with the phrase, "Know your neighbors. Trust your instincts. And never underestimate a man who loves his truck." By the end of the year, our story had become part of the neighborhood lore. New residents would hear bits and pieces, some accurate, some wildly exaggerated, but the message always stayed the same. Don't mess with good people trying to live their lives. Especially if one of them has a brother who builds war machines for a living. And as for me, I still drive that truck every day. It's louder than ever, rebuilt better than before, and I park it right in the same driveway Karen once called an eyesore. Only now, when I rev the engine, people smile. They wave. They know the story. And I know this, if she ever tries to come back, if anyone like her ever rises again thinking they can control a community through fear, they'll have another thing coming. Because this isn't just a neighborhood anymore. It's a battlefield she already lost.